You heard it mentioned that, that Representative Peter King, Representative Greg Walden, and Senator Rockefeller were the three most prominent folks that introduced legislation to cause FirstNet to happen. The FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel was working in Senator Rockefeller's office at the time, and you heard us mention her before. But one of the things that we always appreciated about the chairwoman is that she was extremely efficient with her meetings. She was very candid with us about what was good about our idea and what probably wouldn't work, and she would take the time to explain to us why those things wouldn't work. So we didn't ever leave that office just feeling like we went to a meeting. We left that office feeling like someone was trying to help us solve our own problems. And I can say definitively, there are less than a handful of people that we touched over this period of time that you never questioned whether they were here for public safety. And Chairwoman of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel, was one of those people that just we never felt like she had any motive other than to just help the senator help public safety. Chris, if you'd take the introduction.
So it is, first of all, a privilege for both Jeff and myself to introduce the chair of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel. Please hear me.
All right, those were kind words.
There are many more, ma'am.
I think it's just because I have stories from 10 years ago.
That she does.
All right, good afternoon. It is great to be with so many public safety heroes today, and it is a little warm in this room, isn't it? You're all in uniform and jackets. Boy, all right, I'm feeling it too. But I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Chris Moore, Jeff Johnson, for that kind introduction. You know, last October, actually, Chief Johnson was a panelist for a field hearing we held at the Federal Communications Commission on network recovery following disasters. And he shared his firsthand experience from fighting fires and his ideas about what we can do to enable our communications networks to truly be there for us when we need them most. And I'm glad that today I can reciprocate just a little bit and speak at this event with so many of you and so many public safety leaders. So, this event is a celebration of FirstNet's 10-year anniversary, and that is a big milestone. Now, the truth is, we might not have had a first anniversary, let alone a 10th, without the work that so many people in this room did to rally legislators, companies, first responders, and the public at large to create something truly remarkable: a secure, nationwide communications network for public safety. So thanks to your efforts, 10 years ago, as you know, Congress created the First Responder Network Authority and helped build just that. And the last 10 years, I think, have proved the point, because FirstNet has grown to become a vital partner for public safety, and the numbers alone show how far we've come. It's now a network with more than 3 million connections, nearly 3 million square miles covered, and more than 19,000 public safety agencies participating nationwide. So, beyond the numbers, what does that mean? Well, you know, FirstNet, the network it uses, it's unique. It's dedicated nationwide to prioritizing public safety communications during emergency. And on top of this, its deployable assets are used to help boost connectivity after storms and other disasters. And we have more than our fair share of those. Plus, FirstNet services are now being used at COVID-19 testing centers, field hospitals, and incident command posts. Now, at the FCC, I feel like we have to work hard to match this energy level on public safety. And over the past year, I just want to comb over a few of the things we've been able to get done to make sure that public safety is better informed, better resourced, and better prepared. In March, just a year ago, we adopted a new framework for sharing outage information with state, federal, and tribal public safety agencies so they could improve situational awareness and save lives. In April, we proposed new rules to make 911 call centers and the public get timely information about network disruptions that cut off 911 service. And in June, we adopted new policies to help 911 fee diversion. We want to bring that practice to a stop. And as some of you may know, that's when states put a line item on your phone bill and say that the money goes to 911, but then they turn around and use it for other purposes. It's not right, it's not fair, and we shortchange public safety in the process. In August, we worked with FEMA to conduct a nationwide test of wireless emergency alerts, and in September, we started a rulemaking to better understand evolving threats to 911 call centers, including ransomware and cybersecurity threats. And in October, we started a rulemaking to consider network resiliency after Commissioner Carr and I toured storm damage from Hurricane Ida in Louisiana. And I bring that up to point out that bipartisanship can still exist in Washington. But here's the thing about anniversaries. They're an opportunity to reassess the past, take stock of the present, and think a little bit about the future. So that's what I want to do with you today. I want to kick off my remarks with a look back, share some thoughts on what we're doing with the present, and then leave you with a big idea for the future. First, a lesson from the past. It's really impossible to discuss this anniversary without also remembering one of our most difficult days. The events of 9/11 left an indelible mark on this country, and in my family, as some of you may know, that mark is personal because we lost a relative in the Twin Towers. What strikes me now is how those attacks drew us together as a nation. We united in inexplicable grief and shared sorrow. But we also saw how the worst brought out the best in us, and we're forever grateful for the heroism of so many first responders who ran toward danger and saved the lives of so many more. Now, it's hard to believe it's been nearly 2 decades since that day, and 2 decades since we learned that when emergency personnel came from all over to help in this unimaginable crisis, they could not effectively communicate with one another because each jurisdiction had its own communications protocols. It was those failures 20 years ago that put us on course to this moment and this celebration today. That's pretty extraordinary. But this experience also confirms just how hard it can be to advance public safety. It takes patience and perseverance. I mean, you can just do the math here. FirstNet was born out of a recommendation from the 9/11 Commission report, which came out in 2004. FirstNet wasn't authorized by Congress until 2012. It's not higher level math, but you could see 8 years. And in my lifetime, no other event has done more to unite this country and galvanize support for policy responses. But still, it took 8 years. Now, I know you know how hard it was. After all, I did have a front row seat because, as Chief Johnson mentioned, I served as counsel to the Senate Commerce Committee and Senator Jay Rockefeller, who helped lead the charge and see that FirstNet came to be. Now, as I mentioned ago, this effort to develop FirstNet was informed by the 9/11 Commission report, but I actually think the fundamental idea goes back much further, all the way back to the Communications Act of 1934. In the very first sentence of that law, Congress instructed the FCC to make available to all people of the United States a rapid, efficient, nationwide, and worldwide wire and radio communication service in order to promote the safety of life and property. Think about that. 88 years ago, when congressional leaders were establishing our first expert agency on communications technology, they understood that promoting public safety should be central to the mission of this new body. It's not just that I think they were right. I think that those words resonate today now more than ever. So remember this. It takes time to launch a public safety initiative. It takes a community. But as we've learned, it's worth the effort. So now on to the present. If the past taught us that we need to bring public safety along as we transition to next generation technologies, then we need to make sure we are heeding that lesson in the here and now. I'm proud to say the FCC is making efforts to do just that. 2 years ago, over my objection, the agency decided that public safety no longer needed airwaves in the 4.9 gigahertz band to support their mission. And under new rules, state licensees could kick first responders off of these airwaves and lease them to others. just to generate revenue. The public safety community thought this was a bad idea, and so did I. After all, for 2 decades since 9/11, it has been government policy to increase opportunities for interoperability for first responders, and these new rules would have reversed that trend by reducing public safety communications interoperability and further fragmenting equipment markets. This would set us back. So in one of my first actions as chairwoman of the FCC, we vacated these earlier rules. At the same time, we kicked off a new rulemaking to think big about the future of the 4.9 gigahertz band with public safety front of mind. For starters, we asked how we could use this spectrum to advance public safety access to newer technologies like 5G. And we've got new ideas to make it happen. We're exploring priority and preemption for first responders, excess capacity leasing to create new commercial opportunities, and shared access models like the Citizens Broadband Radio Service. We've compiled a comprehensive record in this proceeding, and actually we're reviewing it right now. Now, I'm convinced there are creative opportunities for this spectrum that will help us expand our 5G future and bring public safety communications along too. So to recap, we've learned lessons about public safety from the past, and I think we've corrected course in the present. Now, I want to talk about how we can build on this for the future. With FirstNet, we are remaking our first responder networks for the digital age. Now I think we need a plan to remake our 911 systems for the digital age too. After all, a public safety network is only as powerful as the networks that allow all of us to reach emergency services in the first place. And let's face it, our 911 systems need an upgrade. There are now more than 6,000 911 call centers across the country, and many of them use legacy technology that was really built for an era when most communications involved a curly cord and a jack in the wall. Plus, 911 outages have become far too common. In 2014, more than 6,000 emergency calls went unanswered because of a multi-state outage that affected more than 11 million people in Washington, North Carolina, South Carolina, Minnesota, California, Florida, and Pennsylvania. In 2017, there was a social media post with a link targeting faulty phone software that caused people's cell phones to repeatedly call 911 in cities across the country in what some investigators say was the largest cyber attack on the country's 911 system. Now, during this time, emergency call centers in at least a dozen states were overwhelmed for 2 days. And in the fall of 2020, 911 services went down again in 14 states, some for as long as an hour and a half. And later that summer, in the same year, we saw a nationwide outage that resulted in more than 23,000 calls to 911 not reaching emergency call centers. So let me just submit to you, we can do better than this. We have led the world in wireless. The digital revolution began here on our shores. I think we should lead in emergency communications too. That means it's time to make the switch nationwide to next-generation 911 systems. After all, next-generation 911 means better support for voice, text, data, and video communications, and with more opportunities for redundancy to prevent outages too. It can mean the opportunity to offer real-time video of the emergency. It can mean the opportunity to provide first responders with instantaneous pictures. It can mean the ability to send along a patient's medical records to 911 dispatchers. And for those who take calls in an emergency, all of this data would inform public safety efforts and dramatically improve public safety emergency response. Okay, so here's the challenge. These kind of 911 investments, they don't come cheap. And for the thousands of communities across the country that have to do these upgrades, it's not clear where the support to make them will come from. But I think there's a way to do this, so let me explain how. Back in 2012, as you know, Congress gave the FCC authority to use innovative spectrum auction to help usher more spectrum into commercial wireless markets. The spectrum auction that was held in the 600 megahertz band took full advantage of this authority and then did one better. Because after auctioning the public airwaves off, we set aside the revenue raised for public safety. This was the seed funding for FirstNet. And if you recall, under the law, the first $7 billion in revenue raised from this auction went to set up our first nationwide network for first responders. It was FirstNet. It was a terrific idea, and it's the network we're here celebrating today. I think it's time to do something similar for 911. Historically, our nation's 911 systems have been updated through fees on bills and a mix of town, county, and state funding measures. But as with first responder communications, it's time for a nationwide digital upgrade. This is a generational change that needs billions in broader support. So take note. The FCC's authority to auction spectrum is scheduled to expire at the end of this fiscal year. For the accounting types, that's September 30th, 2022. Now is the time for Congress to develop legislation to extend it, so the agency can continue to offer airwaves for new commercial uses and power our wireless future. But it can go one better and copy the model used to create FirstNet. It can take the first set of funds raised from our next auctions and use them to support a nationwide upgrade of 911. Once again, we would be using the auction of public airwaves to support public safety. And the funds would flow to every state and jurisdiction with 911 call centers to help make next generation 911 a reality nationwide. You can think of it this way. This is next generation spectrum for next generation 911. Like with FirstNet, this idea for public safety spectrum, well, it's going to take some time. It will take some perseverance, and it will take work to develop this idea with legislators, companies, first responders, and the public, though you do already have one regulator on board. But it's worth the effort because 600,000 people a day call 911. So many of them dial when disaster strikes, the unthinkable occurs, and when they need help in the most fundamental way. Every one of those calls should be answered by a call center with full access to digital age technologies. Every one of those calls should be answered using next generation 911. And 10 years from now, if we are successful, maybe we can reconvene this group to celebrate the anniversary of another major leap forward for public safety communications. And I look forward to working with you to make that happen. Thank you.
You have a few minutes to take a couple questions?
Sure.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is leadership right there, front and center, representing and supporting public safety. That's why you heard all the things you heard from all of us, that how valuable she is to our country, but to public safety in particular. I have a couple questions. She's graciously consented to answer a couple questions from the room in the short time we have left. One of them has to do with, well, it's more of a statement and a question. You mentioned the bipartisan nature of what you do. Let's be real. In order to get, you had a 2-2 commission. You took over as the chair, the acting chair, and yet you were able to get folks on the other side to come and say, this is a different viewpoint from things you just voted on. You had members on the other side that just voted to vote the other way. That's a real testament to you, but just, is bipartisanship dead? And it sure doesn't sound like it if you got the right leaders.
I think if you're in public service, you got to be an optimist. You got to go in every day believing you can make things a little bit better. And if you take that attitude, you don't have time for the criticism and snark that says that you'll never find a bipartisan partner in progress. So I go into work every day trying to find that opportunity and make that happen. And I think you should expect that from people in Washington, because it's going to be the only way to get things done.
It's rare to hear that kind of ground truth, but that's what it's all about, particularly the FCC. Now, I will say this about her. She challenged us because there are things, she's responsible not just looking after us, it's the whole country. And when you come down to it, she said, look, there are other considerations here. Let's talk about use. To have fallow spectrum, as we all know, for those in this room, that's a sin. It's a mortal sin. You don't do that. So what you want to do is find a path forward that serves the need of public safety with priority, when we have found that we can do that, and yet at the same time, bring back opportunity for the commercial sector to do it. So it's just not all about, hey, embrace public safety. It's being smart about how we do it. So we have a couple minutes here for questions. If anybody in the room Martha's got a mic that we're going to walk around to anybody. This is a rare opportunity to address the Madam Chair.
Just raise your hand. Oh, lovely. Nice to be through.
Thank you, Chair. Is this on? Oh. Thank you, Chair. Karima Holmes out of DC, out of the FirstNet board. Nice to see you again. Thank you for those words. So one of the things that Chief Carrizo always asks, and I want to ask you, is the last piece of your talk, you talked about next gen 911, and obviously I'm very passionate about that, but what can we do? Not just FirstNet board, but the authority, those of us that support FirstNet, what can we do to help make that come to life? Because I think that's definitely needed.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate all you did at DC's 911 as a DC resident, and more generally for being in public service for so long. Well, I made note of an important date there, September 30th, 2022. Congress will have to choose whether or not to extend the FCC's authority to auction off our airwaves, right? That's the stuff you don't see above us that powers all of our phones and devices. And the agency has had that authority since 1994, and periodically it has to be renewed. One of the big times it was renewed last was with FirstNet. And in exchange for renewing it and directing the auction of certain spectrum, we had funds reserved to start our nation's first public safety network. And what I'm saying now is that it's time to organize and build a movement around that date, that we can have next generation auction authority if we have next generation 911. And I think that building a movement like this is not easy, but you see, you're all sitting in this room, so I know you've done it before. And success like one time is sweet, but it's even sweeter if you can produce it another time. And if we can look back and say, it took decades, but we made generational change in the way that public safety communications takes place in this country, I think that's worth the effort. So developing policies and finding ways to interact with Congress associated with that date, building on the model from FirstNet, I think that these ideas are all available, and there are probably a lot of folks in the public safety community who are ready to get going on them.
Thank you for that answer. Any other questions? We've got time for maybe one or two. I cannot believe a crowd there. Guys, see you tentative. Put your hand up. There you go. Oh, they got it.
Hi, Chairwoman. My name is Tim Bryan. I was appointed to the inaugural board of FirstNet for the first 3 years, heavily involved in the initial procurement, which has been a tremendous success, how the procurement ultimately played itself out, particularly financially for the government. Do you see this as an example that could be replicated? I don't know of many other sort of public-private boards that have been set up inside the United States government to carry out these sorts of things, but I would urge the Commission and others that it could be carried out with great effect for other topics as well as public safety. Thanks.
That's a terrific point. I don't think I have more to add on, but I think that the more successful that FirstNet is able to become, the more likely we're going to see this model used elsewhere.
Okay, our final question is going to come from Chief Kim Zagaris. Now, people ought to understand that your colleague, Commissioner Carr, dubbed him a national treasure. So here's the national treasure for you.
It's not necessarily a question. It's more of an issue here. It's easier to extend legislation than it is to go make legislation. That's what I would tell you all right now. And so we'd be crazy not to get behind the issue, start moving it now, and getting the right leaders in the legislature, congressionally, to move it. Again, easier to extend legislation than it will be to go back after the date and get new legislation.
Thank you very much.
You know, spoken like someone who knows what he's talking about. There you go.
So with that, there are no other questions. I think we're right on time. I really appreciate the Chairwoman's time, your commitment to public safety, everything you do, and more importantly, the encouragement that you've given to all of us, not only on FirstNet in the years past when you were on the House staff, but also in your role, your leadership role today, but into the future. You know, we all don't know how long it's going to take to get Next Gen 911 done. Some of us thought it should have been done years ago, but at the end of the day, we're there, we're on our way, we're going to make
Optimism.
sure that...
I said
optimism, that's
optimism.
right. So please, ladies and gentlemen, give a hand for
Thank you.
the chair.